Hello and welcome to the Tech to Take with You, leveraging your new skills in the post-pandemic classroom. I'm Dr. Alicia Drellick from the Department of Interdisciplinary and Inclusive Education.
And I'm Dr. Jill Perry from the Department of STEAM Education.
In this presentation, we're going to talk about the transition that we had in the last school year as we moved to virtual learning platforms, and talk about how you can leverage those skills in your new classroom as we emerge from the pandemic. Looking where we've come from since the 2020 shift, many schools have moved to one-to-one technology so that students have their hands on either a tablet or a Chromebook or some type of technology that they can use in the classroom. Many schools and districts have also increased their tech infrastructure, whether that's increasing Wi-Fi networks or bandwidth, or providing additional access to teachers for professional development. During this time, there's also been a shift in learning, and students have changed the way that they are accessing information as they are working in asynchronous formats or learning on the go. During this time, teachers like you have continued to sharpen your skills and refine your practice. And we are now in a point where we are emerging and learning and developing new best practices.
So in terms of those best practices, those emerging best practices, we're going to consider 4 domains together today. The first of which is communication, and that's with students, colleagues, parents, how to leverage that idea of leveraging your LMS, your learning management system, providing increased access to materials, enhancing engagement, providing better feedback. And third domain is alternatives to text. So trying to push away from things being incredibly text dependent to really using tech tools to help us look at multiple modes of representation. And then in terms of collaboration, it's the 4th domain, increase engagement and accountability. So we want to hear from you while we are working today. So as we are watching this video together, we'd like you to add some tools, tips that you use in your classroom connected to the domains that we're talking about. Just share them in the chat as we go. And we'll start with the first domain, communication. So again, if you have ideas around this, drop them in the chat. So communication provides, what we're talking about is 4 different ways that we can enhance communication with technology. First of all, it provides opportunities for nonverbal engagement. So as we're working in class, students can use the chat function. You might also create a Jamboard or a Padlet as a way where students can communicate with you and you can communicate with students. You can also use reactions and other features that the virtual environment provides. So we can still hold on to those kinds of tools, even if we take this idea of reactions and turn them into the analog world. So remembering that we can also do personal check-ins with students. We can do that via emails, our learning management system messages. We can also set up reminds as ways for us to communicate with students. Streamlining communication with parents. We have Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, the Microsoft environment that you might be working in. And there's also Class Dojo, and again, Remind. Remind is another great way to communicate with parents. And finally, polling. In terms of communicating with students in class, we can still use packages, software packages, or apps like Poll Everywhere, which just requires a cell phone or a computer. Menti.com, same thing. And Google Forms are another great way to gather polling information because you can display data right away with Google Forms as well.
In our next domain, we'll talk about leveraging your learning management system in order to truly use this as a tool that can help model executive functioning and organizational skills for your students, as well as provide needed support. So first, when you are thinking about how to move your learning management system forward, and here we're talking about things like your Google Classroom, Schoology, or the system that your school is using to put up information, access to content, as well as grade student work. First and foremost, this gives students the ability to access materials before, during, and after learning. And it's really important that students have the links to access content after the direct instruction is completed in class, so that students can reconnect with that information. Oftentimes, this is something that is an accommodation for students with disabilities, but we're seeing universal access for all students to these materials before and after instruction. It's really beneficial to help increase mastery. Using an LMS also allows you to model and teach executive functioning and organizational skills. One thing that you can do is post suggested timelines or estimated times to complete certain tasks, as well as provide things like checklists or step-by-step directions for students to complete learning tasks. Learning management systems also allow you to do away with that big old pile of paper that you might have taken home before the pandemic. You want to make sure that you are streamlining virtual submissions and providing virtual feedback. This allows students to really take ownership of their documents and not lose paper documents or the documents that might have been provided through traditional paper feedback. This stores that information and allows both you and students to go back to feedback to ensure that they are applying it later. Finally, a learning management system really gives you some robust data that you can use to help make data-driven decisions, both in instruction as well as behavioral and social emotional interventions. So continuing to monitor things such as activity on learning management systems is something that you might want to consider to ensure that students are staying engaged and to help determine additional supports that might be needed in order for students to connect with content. Some additional tips for modeling and supporting students for organization and executive functioning skills is, again, to post things like schedules and due dates. You can also post reminders in calendars in some LMSs, which is very helpful. You can also show students how to organize information in one place by posting schedules, notes, and agendas in a centralized location. Students are really receiving a model with what the organization of material and content might look like. Another great use for learning management systems is the ability to create, annotate, and utilize shared notes throughout a classroom. So this, again, gives students opportunities to reconnect with content after a lesson. Finally, you can encourage students to access this material outside of class, whether they are accessing it for a homework assignment or they are accessing past material in order to apply it in an independent learning task. So utilizing your LMS and making explicit when and how students are interacting with different pieces of a learning management system can really help students boost these executive functioning skills that are needed outside of the K-12 world. In our next domain, we're going to talk about alternatives to text. And here we're looking at a shift from traditional narrative readings to the idea of narrative readings with the support of alternatives through multiple means of representation. We've seen growth in this area during the pandemic as students are accessing content on the go. When we're thinking about providing multiple means of representation, some things that you might do to support students is provide videos that might be related to your particular content area of focus or your particular unit. When you're providing videos, you want to be sure that you're selecting content that is accessible. So selecting content that has captions so that students can read along if they are not listening to the audio. When you're accessing these videos, you want to make sure that you are using high quality and trusted sources. I recommend that you connect with sources through open educational resources. There is a link that I'll post in the chat that's also accessible on our infograph that you have access to. And it's a great place to really dive into platforms that have been created for educational purposes that have been well vetted. Another idea to increase access to content without bogging students down with additional text is through podcasts. These are really helpful, and students can access these while they're on the go, whether they're walking, on the bus, or driving to school. So this is a great way to give students access to auditory information. Again, we want to make sure that we're selecting accessible content. So when you're looking for podcasts, you want to make sure that you're selecting a podcast that also has a transcript available. So again, students can read along. And providing narratives in virtual format, you can allow students to use things such as a screen reader, which accesses the text-to-speech features in a platform or within a particular device. This allows students to hear a narrative read to them, making information more accessible. Students can use this to read selected words. They can potentially use this to translate unknown words into a different language, or they can, again, use this to hear larger pieces of the text to help them comprehend the text that is being read. And finally, when we're thinking about providing multiple means of representation for information, we want to think about the idea of snackable content. So really meeting this generation of learners where they are by providing little nibbles of information. And snackable content can be things like mini clips. So whether that is a mini lecture that you provide that's under 5 minutes, or a mini video clip. Even more snackable are things like infographics, meaningful memes, and GIFs. So when we're thinking about the idea of meaningful memes and GIFs, these are, again, related to content to help boost meaning. So something like an acrostic to remember a process can be something that is very memeable or GIFable. So using things like mnemonic devices that can be associated with an image are things that students can take with them, and they serve as a means of supporting generalization over time. Again, when we're developing this snackable content, we want to think about accessibility. When I think of creating this type of content, I always think of my mobile learners. Can my students access this information on a tablet or smartphone? Can they access this on the go? So when we're doing this, we want to make sure that we are targeting our media so that it can be engaging to meet our students where they are.
Our final domain is real-time engagement. So in the fall, hopefully, we'll all be in the same physical spaces as our students, and we'll be able to engage with them like we have in the past. We'll have whiteboards again and poster paper and sticky notes, but there's so much that's portable and accessible in the virtual world that we can hold on to. So Dr. Drellick highlighted that this kind of access and organization of all of the things in our learning management systems and all the tech tools that we use, they support students in executive functioning, and they probably also support some of us as well in that. And so in terms of coming back to school with students, the tools that we will have, we want to talk about some of the ways that they'll actually support, they can still support real-time engagement with students. So the first way is that student thinking can be made visible and or audible. So we can hear students, we can see the work that they've done, and we'll talk about some tools that will help us do that in a minute. Students can work independently on their own and then take the work that they work on independently and add it to a collaborative space in which students are working. So yes, now, like again, in a physical world, the way we do that, we can have students work on sticky notes or use glue and put on poster paper. But we can also do all of that in the virtual world as well. Collaborative work can be made accessible to all. So not only the students who are working on the work can see it, but everybody can see it. And there are lots of accessibility tools that we can use toward that. And this kind of work can be re-accessed anytime and used in new ways. So let's talk about some of the tools that we can actually use to do this. So tools that we think we should take with us. First of all, Docs, Google Docs, Slides and Sheets, or the Office, PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. So we can still use those tools because they provide students with lots of opportunities to create documents, to do their rough draft thinking, to create documents that they can work collaboratively on. And again, it's much more permanent than a handwritten document. So even though it's digital, it seems less permanent. It's actually more permanent because it exists in the cloud. And students can access those. There are multiple accessibility features in those. And as teachers, we can always dive in and see what students are doing as they work independently or collaboratively. Second kind of tool is creative workspaces. Yes, we've got poster board. Yes, our poster paper, and yes, we have sticky notes, but we do have online collaborative spaces like Jamboard that allow students to bring in lots of different images. They can bring in video clips. So stuff that the paper doesn't allow us to do. So Jamboard, whiteboard.chat is an incredibly robust whiteboard space with, you can put a calculator in. There are lots of things that you can put in, and again, with lots of accessibility features. Padlet, Flipgrid, ThingLink, and if you have others, please add them to the chat. And finally, there's teacher.desmos. It's mostly used by math teachers and science teachers, but the kinds of tools that are available to you as a teacher in teacher.desmos are, it's a place where you can create a sequence of activities for students. Students can put in lots of different kinds of input. They even have things like card sorts that you can create. So lots of different ways for students to interact around your content, and you can give real-time feedback and students can access it again anytime. So those are some tech tools that support real-time engagement.
We're looking forward to a lively discussion based on some of the tools that you have been using throughout the school year to increase student access and engagement. As we think about stepping forward into the classroom next year, it's really time to step from behind the screen and now use technology as a means of increasing student engagement and mastery. When you are selecting technology tools, you want to make sure that you are first thinking about your pedagogical approach and your ending learning goals. How can we use technology to meet those goals? It's important that we are really aligning the tech tool to our student needs and our standards and learning goals. We want to make sure that you are continuing to connect and engage with technology tools and continue to develop through training. One thing that we have learned throughout this year is that technology is going to continue to evolve and be on the move. And the things that you learn in this presentation or in upcoming presentations may be out of date fairly quickly, as ed tech is truly in a boom phase. It's exciting, but it does really take dedication on behalf of professionals like yourself to continuously engage and develop as professionals. Finally, we want to make sure that you are thinking about technology as a means of reimagining and truly reinventing education. So no longer is technology our only means of instruction as we emerge and return to face-to-face, but it is now a means of enhancing your instruction and really developing the new 21st century education. So we're excited to hear about some of the things that you are doing in your classroom and some of the things that you plan to do as we return to face-to-face instruction with technology. At this time, we look forward to taking your questions.